Hey everybody, it's Dr. Parker. We're going to go over your discussion of the Nun's Priest's Tale, which was lively and intelligent and not without controversy. It was great. Uh, so let's dive right in. Y'all had a lot to say, which I think is right. I think there's a lot to say about this tale. Um, so we'll start with Sarah's responses. And the big question was the question of predestination and free will. And I think it's completely appropriate that there was back and forth and disagreement on this, because I think that Chaucer frames it in such a way that it is uh, problematized, and he doesn't give you an easy answer to it, and as that question never does have an easy answer. Sarah has started by saying, I think it ends on the side of free will, because even though Chanticleer was predestined to be caught by the fox, he still managed to get away from him in the end. Um, so I think what was at stake here, or what was kind of being discussed, was the passage itself. What does the passage say that Chanticleer dreamed? So here I've pulled it up here, and this is I think this will, well, I don't know if it'll clear it up, but I think it'll make something clear. So he says, "By God, I dreamed I was in such mischief right now that even now my heart is still afraid. Now, God," said he, "please help me interpret my dream aright. Mi swevna reche arisht. Help me to reckon my dream, swevna, rightly, and keep my body out of foul prison, out of captivity. I dreamed how I roamed up and down within our yard, whereas I saw a beast that was like a hound, and he wolde han madarist upon mi body. He wanted, wanted to capture my body, to stop me from moving, and wanted wolde han had me dead. He wanted to have me dead. His color was between yellow and red. His tail and his ears were tipped with black, unlike the rest of his hairs. He had a small snout with two glowing eyes. From his look, I'm almost dead from fear, and this is what caused my groaning, doubtless." All right, so if we go into that statement, especially lines 2900 and 2901, he wanted to get me, and he wanted to have me dead. So if we get into this question of what exactly did the dream say, the dream did not say, technically, that he was going to die if he encountered this fox. The dream merely said that he was going to encounter a fox, and the fox wanted to kill him. So if we want to take that on a pretty legalistic level, that did come to pass. So if that's what the predestination was, then that is in fact what happened. Now, it certainly has a dark implication that he might die, because this fox wanted to kill him in his dream and in reality. But it really technically never says that I dreamed that he killed me. It's more that I dreamed that I saw him. So if that's, sort of your standard for whether this was predestined or not, the predestined thing did happen, which does not automatically mean, by the way, that Chaucer comes down on the side of predestination. What we would have to see if that were true were if Chanticleer didn't listen to his wife and tried to obey the dream and tried to hide somewhere where he wouldn't see the fox all day. And then if he had avoided seeing the fox, that would mean that his free will worked. And if he ended up seeing the fox anyway, it would mean that it was predestined to happen and he couldn't avoid his fate. I think as it is, he just let his wife talk him into ignoring his dream, and therefore I don't think we really get a true test of free will versus predestination, because I think that Chanticleer doesn't put it to the test. I think that he ignores the possibility that this is a prophetic dream. So anyway, it's a complex. It's interesting how such a simple tale can embody such a complicated question, but that's the kind of thing that Chaucer is really good at. Let's see, number two. Yeah, I asked you to look at the Pertolote description and the Allison description, and I think everybody had good things to say about this. On the one hand, there are some real similarities, which is kind of funny because Pertolote is a chicken, and yet she's described as being, really good looking. On the other hand, there are also differences because there's a certain irony to the fact that Pertolote is described in noble princess kind of terms, whereas Allison is not. And as somebody pointed out, and I can't remember who, but I'll give credit when we get to it, Allison is described more in animal terms, and Pertolote is described more in human terms, which is a nice kind of shout back, I think, on Chaucer's part to the Miller's Tale, or maybe it's just a coincidence, but I don't believe in too much coincidence when it comes to Chaucer. But I also like the fact that you pointed out Allison's a little bit more savvy than Pertolote. Pertolote's a little bit less clever than Allison. I think that's definitely true. Number three, the question about the widow, the widow Stapinaja. She's steep in years. She's kind of old. She's unassuming. She keeps a tidy, simple house. She's a happy woman who's content with her lot. And in this case, you said she's similar to Chanticleer because Chanticleer is happy with his place in life, which is true. I think they're both sort of happy. On the other hand, I think what others have pointed out is that at the same time, the woman is very self-aware and she's very much, she's a common woman and she doesn't pretend that she's anything other. Whereas Chanticleer has kind of decided that he's a king or a lord or something like that. And he gets compared to these epic characters, whereas she is just, she's just a little old lady who keeps a nice house and a small farm. Is the moral don't trust your wife? Maybe. We'll talk about that. Others had more to say, and it could be something like stay true to yourself. And I agree, except that I also think that if it were, I don't think that Pertolote was supposed to stay true to herself. I think it is a kind of a wife-based moral. What is Chaucer saying about marriage here? I think he's saying marriage is good as long as things are going smoothly. When disaster is imminent, look out for your own best interest because your wife doesn't know what's best for you. Yeah, I think it's unavoidable. There's a little anti-wife sentiment going on here. Julie comments, Chanticleer sure did cause a commotion by listening to his wife. Yeah, that scene, once he was snatched by the fox, the hen started quacking, the whole town. Yeah, there's great scene where we've got all this sort of, fine, elegant, epic dialogue, and then suddenly you got chickens and dogs and women with brooms running around, and it turns into kind of a slapstick comedy right there, which is a nice contrast to the high language that was going on before. Susanna admires your focusing on the fact that you point out that focusing on a person leads us into the personification of Chanticleer, and that's right. I mean the little old lady, I think, gives us kind of a baseline, kind of brings us back to reality about what people are and what animals are. Becca has said, there's part of me feels this is really poking fun at marriage and or women. If you're not doomed by destiny, you're doomed by the free will of listening to your wife. Yeah, not much is said about females, but you're right. I mean, at least there is kind of a shout out to the widow as being a good woman with a good head on her shoulders, and things like that. But yeah, I think definitely poking fun at marriage and the, I need to look up. I don't know if the phrase henpecked goes as far back as Chaucer, but certainly Chanticleer is henpecked, literally by a hen, and probably literally pecked. And two, we've got to go back and consider the source. This is told by a priest, So a priest is someone who is supposed to be anyway celibate in a sworn off marriage. Um, so we've got that element of narrator. And also remember that he lives with, I assume, or at least has a lot of interaction with the prioress. And the prioress is maybe not someone who would gild your perception of women to the point where you thought they were wonderful all the time. So I don't know if there's some element of that going on, that his view of women is colored by his life in proximity to the prioress. Um, but yeah, he's definitely not a husband, and that of his own volition. So he may have a bias coming into things that is a little bit anti-marriage and anti-woman. Okay. So speaking of Becca, going to Becca's response here. Yeah, Becca has no, I have no idea about it. That's probably the best answer. I mean, I'm not even sure Chaucer had an idea. The idea of predestination felt kind of tacked on. And you're right. I mean, this is the kind of thing where the footnotes really inform your reading. I guess that I would say that Chaucer's audience would have had more access kind of to these thoughts and arguments than we do. Certainly Chaucer himself did, because I know that he's steeped in ideas about predestination and free will and things like that, because he's a reader of Boethius and in fact a translator of Boethius. Um, and as I say, I think Chaucer's audience, being kind of an upper class audience probably for the most part, would at least have a little bit of idea what he's talking about. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how seriously we can take it. You say it's kind of how I feel about the references Chaucer made in order to make the entire thing seem more noble instead of just about a rooster. And you have this great line: "Swich crive lamentation was never veladi is mad when Ilion was won and Pyrrhus," etc. And you say, I think it was meant to be funny. Oh yeah, it's meant to be funny. I mean, that's completely the whole point of a mock epic, is you take something that's about as low as it can be. In this case, it's a chicken. You know, it's a chicken and some rooster and some chickens, and you compare it to the fall of Troy. Yeah, that's funny. I mean, that. Trust me, that's intentional. He wasn't trying to be serious about this. Um, and then you go on to sort of draw the conclusion. I think the predestination thing was never explicitly given aside, more a light poke on both sides. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely meant to be lighthearted. It's definitely meant to be funny. It's not to say that he can't bring up a serious issue, but I think maybe your instinct is right that in some ways he's making fun of the seriousness of the issue. That, you know, these chickens can sit around all day and talk about predestination and free will, and at the end of the day, you got a bunch of dogs and ladies with brooms chasing after you, and your feathers are flying. You know, in the end, how much does this philosophy really matter to your day to day life? So I don't know, but yeah, no. If you read something in Chaucer and you think it's funny, it's intentional. He was funny among all the other things he was, for sure. You think that Allison and Perlote both have a lot of appeal. And it's strange to talk about a chicken as having kind of sex appeal, but it's, you know, to a rooster, I guess she does. Um, Number 3, the widow seemed like a lovely gal. She seems a little bit old to be a gal, but I guess you can be an old gal. Um, in any case, I got the clear sense the lady was probably humble and had some pretty good sense about her. Yes, I doubt she would have been taken in by flattery so easily as Chanticleer. And I think if she'd been the one to have the dream, she would have kept it in mind and handled it without as much drama. Yeah, I think drama is a good operating word here. The inhabitants of the hen house like drama. They play it up to a large degree, and the widow is no nonsense. She's got no use and no time for that kind of foolishness. So I think you're right about that. The crow and the fox fable, yeah, and in fact, I mean the actual fox and the rooster fable's an old fable. Chaucer didn't make it up. But yeah, it's the same. It's the same fable in a slightly different guise. All of these are Aesop related in some form and at some level. As far as marriage goes, what did he say? It said a lot about women, maybe less about marriage. Women are the cause of bad luck, accidents, and most unpleasant things. I think the Nun's Priest has something against women, like a fear of the unknown. Um, yeah, and again, that's kind of pursuant to your comment that you made earlier, and I agree. I mean, this is a guy who is sworn to celibacy. We know from the epilogue that he's a really good-looking guy, and he's very, he's charming. He tells a good story. So I don't think he became a priest because he couldn't get a wife. So there's something going on for some reason, whatever that might be. He's not super pro woman or super pro marriage, and I think that comes out in the story. Julie admires your take on the moral of the story about self-awareness and common sense. Um, yeah, and I think that again, that's a large reason that the widow is given any portrayal at all in the story, is that she acts as kind of a way for us to see here's what a sensible person acts like and thinks like, as opposed to these chickens and roosters who are not sensible at all. Um, Nun's Priest, yeah, you've got you cite these lines where he talks about women have been the cause of woe for man since Adam and Eve, and that's right in line with the church's tradition of misogyny. These sort of catalogs, just like in the Wife of Bath's last husband had that book of wicked wives, which would have been the same sort of thing. A catalog of all the women who have done bad things, and then of course for their model of good women, they have Mary, um, and who's held to such a standard, especially the standard of virginity, that nobody and obviously no wife can keep up. So yeah, I mean, is he unusual in his feelings about women? Probably not. Does he have something kind of against them? Probably so, and maybe it is just a product of his learning, or maybe it's a predisposition, and then his learning reinforces it. It could be any of those things. Susanna said, "Yeah," and I said predestination in my first response, but now I think that maybe it's got some free will. Yeah, I think that he deliberately leaves it ambiguous because I think it's, for one thing, I think it's a question that is just got a lot of ambiguity to it, and it's possible that human minds, at least in this world, are not equipped to wrap around it. Um, so I don't think there's anything wishy-washy about taking one side and then seeing the other, because I think that he builds in some sort of flip-flop into the story. Predestination is claimed in the story, but free will appears to win in the end. And again, we also have to go back to the passage and say, well, the dream did just say that he would see a fox rather than that the fox would kill him. And then, of course, the other thing is that he doesn't try to avoid his predestined supposed fate, so we didn't really have a strong test of predestination in the story, um, even though it was argued. Um, Sarah Ann says, it's interesting you diagnosed the Nun's Priest with fear of the unknown. Um, yeah, how would the Wife of Bath have felt about it? I think the Wife of Bath might be a little bit shallow to have gotten the subtlety of it. She probably just found it to be funny more than anything. I don't know. That's a good question. Um, they're not the women are not horrible in the Nun's Priest's tale, and of course the widow is actually portrayed pretty well. Pertolote's not a bad, I was going to say person. She's not a bad chicken. She's just very stubborn and full of herself, and convinced that she knows what's right. So I don't know how the wife would feel about that. Let's go to Callie's responses. Callie, you start with the instinct of going with free will. And you're the one who sort of saw that in the dream. It's not really specified. So yeah, you're the one who sort of has pointed out the crux here, the difficulty is that the dream doesn't really, and so even if it is predestination, it doesn't predestine all the, it takes predestination so far to the point of the encounter, but then it doesn't, or at least in his dream, it doesn't tell how the encounter plays out. Allison and Perlote, both lovely princesses, which is a little ironic for both of them. Desirable, yes, they are that. The widow lives a humble life, making the best of the cards she's dealt. She doesn't seem to let anything upset her contented life. Chanticleer seems to be much more swayed by the circumstances in his life. Yeah, you make a really good point, which is that the widow's had genuine hardship. She's had genuine difficulty in her life. She doesn't have much money. She's been widowed. She's got to try to make a living off this tiny farm, and yet she enjoys her life and she makes the best of everything. Chanticleer has the life of a king. He's got these 7 wives. He's the ruler of the roost, literally. But one scary dream and his knees are knocking. Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think that the widow, this is more evidence the widow's put here to help remind us of how foolish and superfluous Chanticleer is. What's the moral? Don't trust flatterers. Yeah, I think that actually, in the Aesop analog to this, I think that actually was supposed to be the moral of the story, was that if somebody flatters you, they're probably trying to get something from you. Number 5, what's the nun's priest saying about marriage? And you point out the author, I mean, not the author, excuse me, the narrator. We're dealing with a character that knows about marriage but has not experienced marriage in his limited understanding. And right, good, that's good reading. Here's a guy who says, oh, I see what goes on. I can tell you exactly how it works. But of course, he's not himself been in a marriage, so he's not really in a position to say these things. Susanna has said, I must go back and reread these things, but you're right. It takes a careful reading. Number 2, these are both these women are both women and chicken are both shams, if we want to call them princesses, because there's nothing particularly noble or elegant about them. Becca's agreeing with Susanna that she needs to go back and read the dream part. The ladies are given short shrift in the story. That, yeah, even if the priest doesn't have firsthand experience of marriage, he should go by kind of a scriptural interpretation that wives are meant to be treated and loved like Christ loved the church. But anyway, yeah. And you went to your dad, who's a resource of infinite wisdom about Ephesians here. And again, you said, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be a cultural thing, the Middle Ages. Yes, right. And I've said it just a couple of minutes ago, but absolutely, it's a view of women that's framed by the church which is run by celibate men. A huge emphasis on the wicked women of the Bible, of the Jezebels and the Eves and the Delilahs. Nobody seems to point out that, David can have his affair with Bathsheba and still be a hero of the Bible, or that Solomon can have 50, 60, 100 wives and still be sort of a hero. The men are allowed to have flaws and especially sexual peccadillos, and women are not. And that's certainly was the emphasis of the medieval church, and you're not exaggerating or imagining things when you say that seems to be a trend. All right, Susanna's response. Her first instinct is to go with predestination, which makes perfect sense. But then we've problematized it since then. The hen was courteous, debonair, sociable. Yeah, you pointed out that at first the description is more about her character than her looks, whereas Allison gets more description of her physical appearance. And in um, the medieval method of describing fair women, you usually did have a combination of looks and then character. You had the affectio, which was the description of her physical appearance, and then the notatio, which was the description of her character, which was supposed to be even more, and they were supposed to be related. If she were beautiful in form, then she was beautiful in character. Um, with Allison, we don't get much of a notatio because there's not much morally or character-wise going on with her. So you're right. There's an irony in the fact that even a chicken gets a little bit more of a description of her nobility than Allison does. Although it's also, it's a mock. It's meant to be kind of funny. Um, the personality of the widow is steady and strong. Indeed, it is. She's self-sufficient, long-suffering. She can still dance because she doesn't eat the rich food that you have to eat to get gout. Gout, which was always seen as the wealthy man's disease. If you had a superfluity of things, that's what gave you the gout. And that her diet, yeah, and as you say, she's actually better for it. I think it says something like because of her moderate diet, she was healthier and happier. So um, she was content and appreciative of what was withheld from her, as well as what was given to her. Whereas Chanticleer seems to be the king. He's described as if he were a great mythical king, and etc. He focuses too much on what doesn't matter and too little on what does, and that is certainly true of him. He's just foolish in almost any sense. The moral would be he that plays when he should prepare never prospers. I didn't think of that one, and that does make sense, and it goes with it. Um, but he's played because of his wife or because of being distracted by his wife. I don't know, but yeah, I think that's a good one. Um, Nun's priest seems to be saying marriage can be a distraction. That's a good way of putting it because it's not necessarily an all-out women are evil kind of story. It's more of a when you're forced to choose between what you think and what she thinks, go with the man, go with yourself. Um, a priest would live a chaste life, so he would not be distracted by caring for a wife or being persuaded by her charms or advice. Um, yeah, I think that's fair enough, and I think that the narrator uh, definitely comes under consideration here. Julie is getting into the predestination question here. If the line placed where it implies Chanticleer was killed by the fox, and that's that's the crux of it. Does the dream imply that he's going to be killed, or just that he's going to encounter the fox? And my opinion is that it's just that he's going to encounter the fox, but I suppose that's open to some interpretation. And Susanna answers back and says that I left my answer open to sound as if I were thinking the dream would come true. But I was thinking actually the fates were saying Chanticleer would be swayed by his wife not to heed the warning, just like the Pharaoh. Not that the dream would necessarily come true. The dream was the intent. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. It's not that he doesn't have free will, but that he sold it on the black market. That he like the marriage market. And I think getting back to what I said originally, yeah, this doesn't end up being a true test of predestination versus free will, because regardless of whether the dream was a true prophecy or not, um, Chanticleer just chooses to believe his wife and ignore it. So he doesn't try to change his fate. He decides that it's not really a fate. So this doesn't end up being an authentic test, one way or the other. Chanticleer even preaches the truth to himself through wise stories of others. Right, he's got examples from Cicero and other places that show dreams can be prophetic, and then he switches his story. Yeah, and you've gone back, and I think you've quoted me kind of correctly. It is what Dr. Parker said, but it's also what Boethius said, which is that how is free will possible if God has foreknowledge, but because God lives outside of time and isn't bound by past, present, and future, he can see what happens 20 years from now, simply because he has the ability to. That doesn't necessarily mean that he causes what happens 20 years from now. And I probably had said this before, but I think the example that Boethius uses in Consolation of Philosophy is that God knows, if there's a horse race, God knows which horse is going to win. That does not mean he made the horse win. It just means that because God lives now and 20 seconds from now and 100 years ago and a million years in the future, all at the same time, doesn't mean that he chooses to cause things to happen, although he can choose to cause things to happen. So anyway, right, I think Julie's got a thoughtful kind of answer here about what's going on. Yeah, and it is, this is an interesting discussion. It is, and it's, the Nun's Priest Tale is always interesting to talk about because it creates, for such a simple story, it actually creates a lot of interest and speculation. The similarities and differences, both in Allison's description and Pertolote's. Number 3, I thought that Chanticleer seemed more prideful, but I couldn't find any particular moments. I think, I think you're right, though. I think just in general, his pride and his looks, the way that he walks, he doesn't have one particular action that is emblematically prideful, but rather he just carries himself and behaves in a way that indicate, Chaucer's good at sketching characters with just a few small strokes. So he doesn't have to give you a big incident. I think we can see that Chanticleer's prideful. I think if you look at the PowerPoint that I did the other day, if you look at just the illustrations of Chanticleer, he's always got that strut to him, that kind of swagger. And I think too, by, culturally, we just see roosters in that way. I think one reason that a rooster was chosen is that roosters inherently just seem to be kind of proud looking and swaggering. And I would like to point out that Susanna got her her answers posted at 11:42, and Julie did not get hers until 11:49. So Susanna has actually relinquished her title as the Queen of Midnight and has passed it over to Julie. So maybe next time y'all can compete to see who gets the closest to midnight when you turn them in. I can't stay up that late. I don't know how you all do it. I guess when I was young. Okay, Julie's responses. Number 1, I think the tale ended with free will. Chanticleer had many choices, starting with following his instincts instead of listening to why he did make choices repeatedly. That's true. Fox also had choices, including opening his mouth to answer Chanticleer. I feel free will is demonstrated by the fact he was able to escape and was not killed like he saw in his dream. And, as I say, we've talked about it, he wasn't necessarily killed in his dream. However, you're right in pointing out that he does make a string of decisions throughout the story that kind of lead him into and out of his predicament. You quoted, as someone else quoted, that Pertolote is a fair damsel. She's courteous, discreet, and debonair. Allison, on the other hand, is described as an animal. Julie is the one who pointed this out so well. She's like a weasel. She's like a colt, I think. She's like a lamb. She's compared to animals constantly. So it makes a nice kind of flip-flop there. The widow is meek and mild and seemingly content with what she has and taking care of her daughters and the farm animals. True. Chanticleer is boastful and full of pride. And this is a good one too. The widow came running immediately at only the sound of danger when the hen started making a racket, but Chanticleer was only startled and did nothing when he spotted the fox. Yeah, that Chanticleer gets frightened by things that shouldn't be frightening, I guess, like his dream. But then when real danger is there, he's pretty uh, blissfully ignorant of it. While on the other hand, the widow has got the good sense to kind of know what is a threat and what is not a threat, and what's possible. So she's just more in touch. She's just, somebody else used the phrase, self-aware. She's just a more sensible creature in all ways than Chanticleer is. You too have said the moral for Chanticleer is never fall for flattery, and that's a pretty good one. I think that's probably the most accurate one for this particular story. Number 5, what do you think it means? What do you think the tale says about marriage? The priest is saying that once a man is married, his balls go into her purse. Yeah, I think this, this image of being henpecked, this sort of take on marriage as being an institution where a guy is emasculated, for lack of a better term, that, Chanticleer, for all his strutting and all of his, and he's got many wives and he's got all this, all it takes is a couple of words from his favorite, and he flip-flops his entire philosophical position, which he's carefully crafted with examples from literature and scripture and everything. Sorry, I was finishing up the last of the coffee there. Callie agrees with the free will thing, but again, we've sort of discussed the complications of this. Susanna admires that you've picked up on the fact that the hen's described as a person, the person described as a hen. Chaucer is just, I hope you're not just now coming to this idea that Chaucer is fun. Yeah, that's absolutely him. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Yep, that's at least one of my grandmothers said that at some point, and probably both of them. Sarah Ann ends up on the side of free will. Number 3, you said, I think the widow and Chanticleer were similar. I mean, they're not, they have like all complicated, I keep wanting to say human relations, but human rooster relations. There are going to be points of similarity and points of difference, and both of what you all pointed out were correct. I think overall the widow's put there to be kind of a foil for Chanticleer, though, to sort of show him up for what he really is and really is not. And then number 4, I like the fact you found several morals based on which character you decided to examine. Fables are good that way. Yeah, that's a simple but very true statement, that a good simple story can carry a lot of weight. And I mean, we know this from parables. Obviously that parables, the parables of Jesus are like fables. They're short, very simple stories, but they carry a pretty heavy impact if they're done right, which they are. And fables can be the same. I don't mean to say that they're the same as parables, but they can be the same way. They're simple. They're easy to remember. Any child could listen to it and understand, but then the wisdom contained within them is and should be profound. Okay, this was a really good discussion, and I will tell you, this is one of the things that I was personally a little bit worried about with an online class, what the level of discussion might be, and I'm kind of sold on it. I mean, you guys have done a terrific job with all these. All right, so I'll say goodbye. I'll get something posted on the Clerk's Tale by the end of the weekend, and we'll continue our discussion. I've got some good emails about papers and paper topics, and they all seem really good. Please do continue to get in touch with me and ask questions and ask for tips and things like that, because I'm ready to discuss them. I hope you have a good weekend.